Welcome to Fight Colorectal Cancer's monthly patient webinar series. This session, Supporting Colorectal Cancer Research, is part of a three-part webinar series for the month of March. We're lucky to have Camille Banta, our policy expert, presenting this information. Our archived webinars, where you can find the three-part series along with our previously recorded sessions, are at link.fightcrc.org/webinars. If you have any additional questions, please call our Fight Colorectal Cancer answer line at 877-427-2111. Quick disclaimer, the information and services provided by Fight Colorectal Cancer are for general informational purposes only. The information and services are not intended to be substitutes for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are ill or suspect that you are ill, please see a doctor immediately. In an emergency, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Fight Colorectal Cancer never recommends or endorses any specific physicians, products, or treatments for any condition. And without further ado, I'd like to present Camille Banta, Principal of Summit Healthcare Consulting.
Thank you, and again, welcome to Fight Colorectal Cancer's advocacy webinar on funding for colorectal cancer research. This webinar is designed to prepare you for speaking to members of Congress about funding colorectal cancer research through the Department of Defense and the National Institutes of Health. During visits to Capitol Hill, Fight Colorectal Cancer advocates should be prepared to ask their members of Congress to demonstrate their commitment to colorectal cancer research by taking two important actions: supporting increased funding to the Department of Defense's peer-reviewed cancer research program, and supporting increased funding to the National Cancer Institute. Like last year, Fight Colorectal Cancer advocates will be approaching their lawmakers with requests to increase funding for colorectal cancer research in a very difficult budget environment. But this is what makes your advocacy efforts in support of colorectal cancer research so vitally important. When President Richard Nixon signed the National Cancer Act into law almost 41 years ago, there was little understanding about how cancer cells develop. Since then, we have invested millions and have made great advances in cancer research. Congress needs to hear that now is not the time to turn back the clock on the federal government's investment in cancer research, especially as the incidence of cancer is expected to nearly double by 2020, especially in the baby boomer population. It is because of federally funded research that tremendous progress has been made in the diagnosis and treatment of colorectal cancer. 40 years ago, the 5-year survival rate following diagnosis of colorectal cancer was 51%. Today, that survival rate is 67%, and progress continues. To prepare you for those discussions, let's review why increased funding for research through the Department of Defense and National Cancer Institute is vitally important. First, the Department of Defense. The peer-reviewed cancer research program was established in fiscal year 2009 to support research into specifically designated cancers with relevance to military service members and their families. The peer-reviewed cancer research program is just one of several medical research programs that fall under the Department of Defense's Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs, or CDMRPs. A hallmark of the peer-reviewed cancer research program is its focus on innovative research in cancers through the support of exceptionally talented early career researchers and clinicians who have the potential to advance the field of cancer research and deliver breakthroughs in the prevention, detection, and treatment of cancer. Since its establishment, funding for the peer-reviewed cancer research program has remained fairly consistent until a 29% cut in fiscal year 2012. Colorectal cancer is asking Congress to provide $16 million for the peer-reviewed cancer research program for fiscal year 2014. By appropriating $16 million to the program, it would restore funding to fiscal year 2011 levels. Colorectal cancer was first included in the peer-reviewed cancer research program in fiscal year 2010. In that fiscal year, there were 472 applications for program funding, of which just over 100 were for colorectal cancer research. That year, 4 colorectal cancer grants were funded for a total of just under $2 million. In fiscal year 2011, the number of grant applications nearly doubled to 845, of which 135 were for colorectal cancer research. That year, also, 4 colorectal cancer grants were funded for a total of $1.3 million. The increase in the number of grants is encouraging, but may also be a sign that researchers are seeking new funding streams as federal and state funding dollars grow scarce. When talking with members of Congress and their staff, it is important to explain to them why research conducted through the peer-reviewed cancer research program is relevant to military service members and their families. Colorectal cancer is one of the most common forms of cancer among active duty military personnel. Yet, colorectal cancer screening rates remain low among military personnel. Additionally, service members are exposed to ionizing radiation in the field, which increases risk of colorectal cancer. To date, examples of research that the program has supported includes research into non-invasive genetic urine tests for colorectal cancer, as well as research on genes associated with ionizing radiation sensitivity and resistance. It is also important to emphasize to members of Congress that the research conducted through the Department of Defense not only benefits military members and their families, but it also serves to benefit the lives of the American public. Next, let's turn our attention to the National Cancer Institute. The National Cancer Institute is one of 27 institutes and centers at the NIH, and it leads a national effort to eliminate the suffering and death from cancer. For the past decade, the NIH budget has remained largely flat. Due to the rate of biomedical inflation, it was 17% smaller in 2012 than it was in 2003. As a result, researchers, especially young researchers, are experiencing difficulty in having their grant proposals funded. The National Cancer Institute funds critical colorectal cancer research, including clinical trials, to which many attribute their survival of colorectal cancer. Today's progress in research and promising scientific opportunities require a sustained commitment from Congress. One of the current priorities at the NIH is to further capitalize on the revolution in genome sequencing. The Cancer Genome Atlas is studying 20 different cancers, including colorectal cancer, which will lead to more targeted and personalized therapies. It's important to remind lawmakers that every state benefits economically from NIH funding. NIH spending in 2011 produced over $62 billion in new economic activity, including more than 400,000 new jobs. Additionally, from 1988 to 2003, $3.8 billion in funding for the Human Genome Project from 1988 to 2003 resulted in a return on investment of $141 in economic output for every $1 spent. This is just one example of the economic benefits of NIH funding. Cancer research can lead to healthcare system savings as well. If research led to permanently reducing cancer mortality by a mere 1%, it would be worth nearly $500 billion. Funding for cancer research lacks proportion to what the country spends on cancer care. Funding for the National Cancer Institute is just over $500 billion, while the annual direct cost of cancer care is $158 billion. Congress needs to do better. Funding for the NIH and consequently the National Cancer Institute is at risk of decreased or flat funding for fiscal year 2014. Fight Colorectal Cancer is asking Congress to fund the NIH at $32.6 billion in fiscal year 2014, which would provide the National Cancer Institute with $5.4 billion. In conclusion, the most effective advocate isn't the person who comes to D.C. armed with a bag full of statistics, but someone who can tie their personal story with key messages and facts. Cancer patients, survivors, and their families can help us understand in real human terms the importance of funding of medical research through the Department of Defense and the National Cancer Institute, and that the United States stands to lose its global prominence in biomedical research and the next generation of researchers if it does not invest in the NIH. Finally, Fight Colorectal Cancer needs you to help cultivate new medical research champions in Congress. Your relationship with your members of Congress should not start and end with a visit to Washington, D.C. Rather, relationship building requires a constant presence with your lawmakers and their staff. The fiscal year appropriations process is likely to stretch until the very end of this year, and Fight Colorectal Cancer will depend on your advocacy support along the way. Thank you for your advocacy efforts on behalf of Fight Colorectal Cancer. This concludes a webinar on colorectal cancer research funding.